It's time to get nerdy, y'all.
A little bit of gaming history for you.
Something relevant in gaming and discuss our opinions on it.
Should we kick it out of here, or should we kick-start it?
This is the part where you, the listeners, try to stump the hosts.
I'm not a lawyer. I just play one on a podcast. Ladies and gentlemen, lads and lasses of all ages, welcome to the show. It is Tuesday, September 24th, 2024, and it is time to get nerdy. Welcome to episode 319 of Two Nerds in a Pod, the nerdiest gaming podcast in the multiverse. I am one of your hosts, Maction, and I am joined by my fellow nerd, a good friend, a connoisseur of comedy. He's not just the first option. He is also the best option. Mr. Lam Galuka, also known as Mr. Nice Guy 425. And for the next hour, we are going to discuss topics as they relate to video games in all the different ways you can imagine. History, trivia, lawsuits, everything in between for our favorite hobby of gaming. But first, Mr. Nice Guy, it's been a week since we've been able to get together and do this show. How you doing? Have a good week?
I'm doing really well, Mac. Things are good. Soccer season is in full effect. It is fall, which is my wife's favorite season. So we did the hot chocolate and biscotti thing this weekend, homemade biscotti. Very, very suburban thing to do. Had a blast doing it. And back before the show started, we were talking about how I'm dang near 40, man. I'm at that midlife crisis mode. And so my friends, I find like the people I hang out with are also in that mode and are just wanting to try new random stuff. So in a couple weeks, I'm going to go curling. I don't know if you've ever been curling.
No, but I'm aware of it. Big weight that you push down the ice, have people scraping in front of it, brooming, whatever they do for the ice to make sure it goes as far as possible. I may have seen a Winter Olympics bit of it.
Yeah, and so that's all it is. I guess there's a Milwaukee curling club. $30, you get 3 hours to go out and learn how to curl, and then afterwards they have pizza and drinks and stuff. So trying new things, and if I didn't already have enough hobbies, I will after this, but I'm looking forward to it. Mac, what's new with you, man?
Well, last week was a bit of a trip, because I flew to Utah to buy a vehicle, and then drove it straight back. Not really interesting, but I got a nice car. I got one of these cars, a Toyota that's gonna go for 300,000 miles or whatever.
Love it.
I wanted the same model as one that I already have, and that's what I got. But I managed to get one because it's like an early 2000s model. But you know, it's only got like 150,000 miles on it for something from the early 2000s in a Toyota, which is pretty low and got a reasonably good deal on it. That's about as interesting as my last week was, but it certainly was a whirlwind of a week. Lots of driving, listening to some podcasts, catching up on stuff as I was driving down that lonely road.
I get it, man. Well, you know what? Listening to podcasts and driving go hand in hand.
Mm-hmm.
But you know what else goes hand in hand? Talking about video games on a Tuesday. But Mac, why don't we do what we do best and hop right up in the gaming news, my friend? What do you think about that?
Let's do it. What is new in video gaming, Lam?
Dude, so much. And welcome everybody who's here live and those listening after the fact to Two Nerds in a Pod, episode 319. We appreciate all of your ears. Mac, this first news story comes from GameSpot.com, written by Claire Lewis. Here's what Claire writes. Pop sensation Chappelle Roan recently caught a fan taking photos of her live performance during a concert, but instead of reacting with irritation, the singer-songwriter seemed delighted once she realized the concert attendee in question was taking said photos via a rather unconventional camera, the one embedded in their Nintendo DS. During a London stop on her Midwest Princess tour, the DS-toting fan caught Roan's eye, prompting the singer to respond, "Blank? Is that a DS?" Mac, there's not much more to the story than that, other than the fact that Chappelle Roan, who I have never heard of, I'm almost 40, said, "You keep taking photos on your DS. You keep doing it," and everybody cheered. Mac, my question for you is this, because it's super interesting to me that gaming handhelds used to have a camera. They used to have all types of functionality.
Mm-hmm.
I'm interested to hear favorite feature from a gaming handheld, and also favorite gaming handheld of all time.
I think the name is Chapel.
Yeah, I probably said that wrong. I'm almost 40.
40. Hey, we're just going to get a lot of mileage out of this one.
The new tagline.
That being said, I've only ever heard other people say it, so either could be reasonable. To me, at least, that's how out of the loop I am. But, we've heard it both ways now, so listener, make up your own mind.
Let us know.
But to your actual question about handhelds, I have, as far as my favorite handheld, I would have to say the Steam Deck.
Yep. Okay.
Even though it is definitely my newest one.
Sure.
But favorite feature in a handheld, I will say that to this day, my mind is still blown by the link cable from the old Game Boy. Just the idea of being able to connect to another person's handheld and play in, sometimes directly, sometimes with other things, or trading with Pokemon, which is mostly what I used it for. But yeah, I would say the link cable is the favorite feature of video gaming. And granted, the stuff for like the Steam Deck blows that out of the water. We can be connected in a way that I could have only dreamed of. But
Sure.
I don't know. I just have such love in my heart for that, little 3.5 foot atomic purple cable that I used to use back in the day.
Chat and those who listen after the fact, let us know what your favorite gaming handheld is of all time. I should have said retro because, clearly, and I got my Steam Deck right here, hey, with the atomic purple back that I modified it with, the Steam Deck is objectively, or at least PC handhelds in general, are objectively better than anything that we grew up with. You can literally play every game ever made that doesn't require some type of peripheral on that Steam Deck, right? You can play, Atari, NES, you can play modern stuff. So, it's objectively the best. I'm going to go with the Nintendo 3DS. And there's a few reasons why. I almost went with the DS because it could play the Game Boy Advance, but the 3DS was the first handheld that I experienced that allowed me to do online multiplayer.
What game would that have been for the online multiplayer?
Like Mario Kart, just Mario Kart online.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay.
And so the idea of being able to play in bed multiplayer on a screen in your hand, even though there was no voice chat, just a super, super cool idea. And revolutionary at the time. And then, they had things like Street Pass incorporated that you just don't see anymore. And Mac, this story really made me think about, will we ever get another dedicated handheld? I don't think we will. What do you think? From Nintendo, from Sony, from Xbox, I could give you my reasons why I don't think we will, but I'm interested to hear if that's how you feel or if you feel different.
Man, it's so tough to say. I'm not exactly good at predicting the future. I think in some spheres, I think I've done okay, but in most situations, I think I've been roundly defeated by the actuality of what goes on. But I kind of feel similar to you, so Mr. Nice Guy, I'm going to curse you by latching onto your position, and therefore we're both gonna be wrong.
We should start doing this show like those sports shows where people are arguing opposite points just for the sake of having an argument. You know what I mean?
Okay, yeah. So I'll take the opposite then.
It'd be insincere. I'm kind of kidding. I'll tell you why I feel like we won't get another one, and there's two reasons. Number one is Nintendo already created a phenomenal hybrid in the Nintendo Switch. And the whole point of handhelds back in the day is that you could play dumbed-down experiences on the go. Now you can play full-fledged experiences on the go. So there's really no reason to make something that's not as graphically good, as smooth with online play, and some things that even have voice chat if you're using a different console. So that's one reason. The second reason is the handheld PC being so prevalent. Sony could have gotten away with putting out handhelds that allowed people to play the stuff that did not exist on Nintendo devices, the Call of Duties, the Baldur's Gates, things like that, even if it was a dumbed-down version. But now the Steam Deck, the ROG Ally, the ROG Ally, the Aya Neo, all of those allow us to do those things. So I just can't see it being profitable for either of the big three to put out a handheld with a dumbed down experience, with a watered down experience, unfortunately.
Yeah. And on top of that, the only time that you would need something that really a computer like, a Steam Deck couldn't provide would be a unique type of interface, or something that you could probably manage by running via USB-C, if not over Bluetooth. But those would all just be kind of like I think you mentioned, peripherals, interesting peripherals to tack on. So yeah, I struggle to find a situation where we couldn't accomplish it with what we've already got. So yeah, I'm with you. I don't think new handhelds are really in the mix for the future. No, I think we've 100%. Kind of plateaued.
Yeah, the only one who may be able to come out with a handheld would be Xbox. And it'd be interesting to see if they made it branded as like an Xbox handheld, or if they branded it as more of a Microsoft handheld PC and just did something that's better than what's out there in terms of graphical fidelity, in terms of battery life. I doubt that exclusives would exist, but it'd be interesting because they've never done it before. So we will see. Mac, one more news story today. This is the biggest one of the day, and it's about the PlayStation State of Play. This is on IGN.com, and it's by IGN staff. Sony's latest PlayStation livestream has come to an end, and we've gathered all of the news and trailers from the event today. The September Sony State of Play focuses on updates about the upcoming PS5 and PSVR 2 games, and we got a closer look at how the PlayStation 5 Pro is enhancing games. Mac, it's super interesting to me that they put out some stuff for the PSVR 2. Some people feel VR is dead. Others feel like it's going through a resurgence. Many people feel that the PSVR 2 did not sell well enough and that they should stop supporting it. So I'm going to ask you a question about VR in a minute. Before I do that, for viewers who missed the show, here are some of the things that were announced. Ghost of Tsushima 2, announced as Ghost of Yotei. This was the headliner of the show. This was announced last, and I'm excited for that. We're getting Horizon Zero Dawn remastered. That was announced. Coming October 31st, and if you own the base version, you can pay $10 and get the upgrade. Monster Hunter Wilds release date revealed. That'll be another Monster Hunter game that I'll pick up and not play nearly enough of, but it's such a nostalgia thing. Astrobot DLC Fall 2024. Midnight Walk announced. Hell Is Us gets a new gameplay trailer. Palworld is out on the PS5 today. We'll talk about that a little bit later in the show. Metro Awakening VR arrives on November 7th, and this one was interesting to me, Mac, because Metro is a pretty solid shooter series. Have you played any Metro games, sir? Metro Last Night or anything?
No, but I have heard of them.
Yeah, they're pretty well known, and so interesting that they're putting out a VR title that, as far as I can see, may be only on the PlayStation VR. And then Arcade Chronicles, my webpage is reloading, is one that interested me as well. So, Mac, my question for you and for the chat about VR is this. Do you think it's possible that we could see a hardware resurgence? And what I mean by that is we've seen games that have come out day one that were not good or that didn't get the recognition they deserved. Among Us, Cyberpunk 2077, No Man's Sky, games like that where at first they didn't pop. Then through time, they were improved or they just got hot. Games like Among Us, someone started streaming it, they got attention. With VR, if we start to get more and more killer apps, do you think that VR could see a similar resurgence to that of which we've seen with those games that didn't pop at first?
I think in theory, yes. However, I have a return question for you, Mr. Nice Guy.
Yeah.
What's the longest amount of time that you can handle being in VR before you have to unplug?
That's a tough question because it really depends on what I'm doing. So if I'm using an app like Big Screen and I'm sitting in there with some random people and we're watching an NBA game that someone is streaming, I mean, I can be in there until it just feels too hot. Like I'm not getting sick. Sure. If I'm playing a game like Pavlov, like a Call of Duty in VR, where it's motion and shooting and I got to be standing up, moving around, I could probably play for 45 minutes and then need a break.
Gotcha. So I think that we could certainly have a resurgence on VR, but I really feel like the future of VR, unless we can get some of those constraints, whether that is weight, whether that is comfort, whether that is motion sickness, until we can really nail down those physical aspects, I think that the way forward in VR is going to be in a game that allows for better short sessions. And so I don't know what these titles are going to be like in VR going forward, these focuses, or how things are going to be improved. But unless we can not really get those physical constraints taken care of, then I think the new killer apps for VR, in order to get us there, to that resurgence that I think you and I both want, is really going to need to be focusing on games that we can pop into and pop out of that are like encouraging short sessions. We need to build for the hardware that we have, not the hardware we wish we had. Until that's what we've got, I feel like.
Yeah, and I don't know, man. I think that VR, I'd be interested in seeing the numbers, but I believe that it has a pretty big install base. I think that there's a lot of us. In fact, you and I have a mutual friend. I have a Valve Index. This person has a Valve Index, Ishmobile, friend of the show. And I believe we both picked them up during the pandemic. And I think that a lot of people picked them up during the pandemic simply because, hey, we're at home. We want some escapism, right? And VR is literally escapism.
Yeah.
So, the idea of a Ready Player One type of experience, I know people who play VR chat for hours and hours and hours on end. I can't do it, but I think that level of escapism, that desire is still there. The install base is there, and so if we get more and more killer apps, it could result in a good thing for the VR industry, and I hope it does. The last thing I'll say about this is the idea of the hybrid VR AR experience, where you can turn the VR off and see your space that you're in, I think would help with what you're saying. The ability to, quote unquote, stop playing for a few minutes and see what's going on around you. So that's it. That has been our news for the week.
All right. Well, now that we've looked at what's going on around us right now, let's take a little look into the past with some video game history. So we have had a few very interesting, very cool, very noteworthy things that have happened this last week in years before. And I think I want to start with the most modern of these items, and that would be in 2013, the release of Grand Theft Auto 5. Now, Mr. Nice Guy, I know that while I have not played much Grand Theft Auto 5, I believe you've played the whole game through, yeah?
I have. I've played the whole single-player game and then a good amount of the multiplayer, and it was on my backlog to get back to it until they messed it up for Steam Deck. I will say it is objectively one of the best games ever made, and it's interesting that they've been able to keep it going, the online aspect, for over a decade and keep it fresh. It's a great game.
Mr. Nice Guy says objectively, and he's not saying that like how people say literally when what they really mean is figuratively. Grand Theft Auto 5 is considered across the board by I think most to be the best game that was released in 2013. I don't know if it received Game of the Year for 2013 when it was released.
So just to answer your question a little bit, sorry to cut you off.
No, please.
2013, The Last of Us also came out that year. So I'm looking at Game of the Years, and that was the Game of the Year that year.
And sometimes it's interesting because, like you said, I mean, The Last of Us, Grand Theft Auto 5 is absolutely still having more people play it in all the years, even up until right now, than The Last of Us is still getting plays. But it's hard sometimes in its day, or even sometimes after it, to quantify which one's better. These works of art, how does one quantify? But I think Mr. Nice Guy is right in his assertion that it's considered to be one of the best, and definitely the best in 2013. However, all due respect to GTA 5, but in 95, released for the PC and Mac, we had a game called MYST. a puzzle game with pre-rendered graphics. Essentially, you would have an image, and certain areas of the image were interactable. Some of those would be puzzles. Maybe you could move a circular cipher lock. Maybe you could interact with various buttons dropped into an island with basically nothing to go on but just your wits. This was the type of game that you needed to have a paper and pencil. You needed to have hand-drawn maps to follow what's going on. Absolutely my style of thing. But there is a particularly interesting aspect of MYST. A technological or technical constraint, if you will. And that's because this is one of those games that was released on CD. And while most of us have our games, digitally or otherwise, in a medium that we access very easily, CDs had this sort of speed that they could run at. They could spin up, spin down. They had a sequential read of 158 kilobytes per second. But yet you had to sort of like bounce around to different spots on the disk in order to get the data. Are you going right or are you going left? Well, when you go there, you're moving to a different section on the spinning disk to try and find that data and play it to you, the gamer. And, 8-bit images, 256 colors at a time. They had good compression, but they also had sound, a soundtrack that was meant to play continuously throughout the various scenes that you were in. And so one of the real wizardry pieces was optimizing the game in such a way that it would have access with this limited speed on the disk, that it would have access to all the various components of data that it needed at any given point in time, even if it was just reading from a single track. So for those of you who are old enough to remember a spinning CD, can you imagine, you can easily imagine that it's sort of written in a way so that each piece of data comes in the song that you're listening to. Each beat, each tone comes just after the one before. But what if you got to pull from multiples? How do you make that work in a technology that was not really designed to do that, in a technology that's based off of the notion of a long play record player with a needle in it, except for you don't have a needle, you have a laser that bounces off and reads a 1 or 0 from it. I mean, that's the type of constraint that they're working with, is the very technology behind it, not like the awesome read access speeds that we have these days with SSDs. But they made it happen, and it is always interesting, at least to me, to think about the types of constraints that they had to work around. And if this at all sounds interesting to you, there is a video, a War Stories video on the subject of the video game MYST, that was put out by Ars Technica, that actually details a lot of the very interesting things that these early video games went through, that I encourage you to have a look at. I saw it over the weekend, and so good timing that we also happened to have the anniversary of MYST coming up to talk about it here on the show. But yeah, wild what some people can do sometimes with limited resources. And while we do have, I will just Galvatron, I see what you're saying. And I think that, he says, if MYST were released today, it would flop hard. People don't have the attention span for a game like that. I think...
I disagree, but I want to hear your thoughts, Matt.
Well, I'm just thinking about a game that came out very recently that I've played called Lorelei and the Laser Eyes, that very, very much has those sorts of sensibilities. Matter of fact, at the beginning, it's just like, hey, you should have a paper and pencil on hand, because this is gonna get multi-dimensional here, and it's something that absolutely appeals to me now. And that is a game released right now. And I think it's doing pretty all right. So I don't think MYST would flop hard. I don't think it would have the mass appeal of something like Tears of the Kingdom, or Breath of the Wild, rather. But I think it would absolutely hold its own. But it was a huge success in '95 as far as video games went. So maybe a flop in comparison, but not in relative terms like we have today.
I get what he's saying, because people today either Google or they just put the game down when they get frustrated. There's not a lot of people like myself and you, Mac, and probably G as well, who get to a tough part in a game and say, yeah, I'm going to figure this out. They say, nope, I have a million other games being thrown at me, and I'm just going to go play one of those. I have a backlog with hundreds of games in it. I'm going to go work on it. So I get what he's saying.
Yeah, but I definitely think it would not flop hard, for sure.
Cool. Well, hey, it's time for Topic of the Week, a segment where we talk about something relevant in gaming and give our opinions on it. As a reminder, some weeks we do the Indie Game of the Week, but we want to make sure that all those indie games that we are reviewing get our full attention and we do our due diligence. So we are not doing one this week. All right. So Mac, I posted something in the Two Nerds Discord last week that I found super interesting.
Indeed.
And now we have some more information on it. So let's start with the original story.
Okay.
Which this version of it comes from thegamer.com. Let's read what George Foster writes. Nintendo hasn't officially confirmed why it's suing Palworld developer Pocket Pair, but it seems that it could be based on a Pokeball patent, and how Palworld's Palspheres directly copy the mechanic. Just a few days ago, Nintendo dropped an absolute bombshell on the internet by revealing that it's suing Palworld developer Pocket Pair. While nearly everyone speculated that might happen when the game released earlier this year and took a lot of liberties with its PAL designs, the real shock came from the lawsuit being based on the claim that Palworld infringes multiple patent rights. Palworld has since replied to the lawsuit and confirmed that it's going to be fighting it, despite apparently not knowing what patents it's infringing on. Nintendo hasn't revealed any more details about the situation just yet, but it seems that it might be based on a Pokeball patent. We read that already. Mac, this is a super interesting story, and you said that you had thoughts on it when I posted that on the Discord.
Indeed.
So before I share the other development, I want to hear those thoughts.
Short version, in intellectual property law, you have copyright, which is meant to protect a specific expression. You have trademark, which is supposed to protect the title of a character. And then you have patents, which are supposed to protect specific technology. Hardware patents to cover your specific video game console. And software patents to protect the specific ways you make something happen. Software patents are not supposed to... Explicitly, they are not supposed to preclude other people from using similar ideas, just your very specific implementation. However, not always is that the way that it happens. Not in the US, and apparently maybe not in Japan, because as I understand, this patent dispute is going on exclusively within the Japanese legal system that I know even less about than the U.S. legal system. So I have thoughts, I have feelings. It's hard to get more specific because, like they point out, nobody has said and what exactly the patents are. We're just guessing. But would it surprise you, Mr. Nice Guy, to know that I happen to have a list of some of the patents that that the Pokemon Company happens to have been assigned?
That does not surprise me in the slightest.
Would it surprise you for me to tell you that I was, say, interested in just reading a couple of the titles?
Please do.
Because we don't have the time to go in too far into depth. So, for example, a patent that the Pokemon Company applied for in 2022 and received only about 14 days ago, gamification of health awareness based on sleep patterns. a patent awarded for that, a gamification of health awareness based on sleep patterns. A non-transitory computer-readable storage medium having stored therein game program, game system information processing apparatus, and information processing method. I mean, just exciting titles, all of these.
Love it.
So there are supposed to be patents for like a very specific method, a very specific whatever, but not so much like, this specific method of storing information or processing the information. Yeah, maybe sure you get a software patent on that. But a patent on the idea of a sleep pattern being a health awareness basis in a video game, or for example the one that came up with that one Shadow of Mordor, was it, video game, the Nemesis system that was patented and hasn't really been used in any other video game since. The notion that as you progress, that the enemies also progress, that is patented. Absolutely shouldn't be, I don't think, because it gets in the way of video games having that type of an idea and doing something with it. So, like, I understand why. I'm just disappointed that that's where it's going, that like they're going to be like, hey, we got this patent for something that probably we shouldn't have been given a patent for, and now we're going to bludgeon you to death with the patent that we probably shouldn't have. Now, of course, the flip side is that in courts, if you test whether or not this patent is really, the court might be like, hey, that patent should have never been given to you in the first place, and then they kick you out and you lose the patent that you had. So that there is always some risk associated there, at least in the US system. Not too familiar with the Japan system, but I have rambled way too long. Those were kind of my thoughts, Mr. Nice Guy, about it generally.
I appreciate that. And a couple things that I noticed. First of all, this is either very, very calculated, intelligent timing by Nintendo, or very, very stupid timing. Because sometimes in business, you just don't want to give your competitors any more attention than they already have. Was I aware of Palworld? Absolutely. But it was not on my radar until this lawsuit came out a few days ago. And then today, during Sony's State of Play, they announced that Palworld is coming to PlayStation 5 today. So I can't help but think that Nintendo was somewhat aware of that, which makes me think, why not just wait on the lawsuit or quietly put it out? There's a lot of attention that this is getting, which means the game is getting a lot of attention, which means that some people may purchase it just for fear that it may go away or be taken down. Simply because Nintendo often wins these lawsuits. So that's super interesting to me. I saw a comment online that I thought was very telling, and they said someone needs to put Nintendo in their place. I'm paraphrasing here. They didn't have any problem with Digimon over the past 20 years. Why are they going after Palworld? And to me, without us knowing what copyright or what patent infringements were made, it's really, really hard for us to form an opinion. But I will say there are a lot of games out there that are derivative of Pokemon, or that borrow ideas, thoughts, references, mechanics from Pokemon. Simply the battle system, right? There's plenty of turn-based RPGs that have that type of battle system, that have team-based battle systems where you switch a player out, bring someone else in. They have certain attacks. Like, that's not anything new.
Absolutely.
So we'll have to see what happens with this. I'm rooting for Palworld. Not a game for me, but I just think Nintendo's timing was bad. Last thing, Mac, you mentioned the Japanese legal system being different. And I did notice that there is no release date for Palworld in Japan. It was on PlayStation 5. It was released here in the States, but in Japan, as far as what I've read, not available. So I assume that that's somewhat related to the lawsuit. Otherwise, they'd be trying to get their money.
Could be. It's hard because we're doing so much reading of tea leaves in this. It'd be nice to have some information, any information, frankly.
Yeah. So, hey, I'm curious what the chat thinks, if you're rooting for Nintendo or if you're rooting for Palworld. I think most people will be rooting for Palworld. Love you, Nintendo. You make great games. You make great hardware. But sometimes you got to just let this go. And, Mac, it's not like this is a fan project. It's not like they took assets from Super Mario, or Zelda, or even Pokemon. I mean, yes, it's very clear the influence that Pokemon had in this game, but as far as I can see, until I know what they're being accused of, I'm rooting for Palworld.
Same. Definitely the same.
And that has been the topic of the week.
All right, well, now we turn to a crowdfunding project that's trying to get off the ground. We call this little thing Kick, or Kickstart. This one, today's Kickstarter project, I'm going to drop a link into the chat so we can have a look. A little bit different, because while we do mostly do video games, I mean, occasionally we do a little bit of tabletop role-playing games. And this one is called Paragons. This is a new RPG system that they're putting together. It's out of Chicago by a new group called Broken Door Entertainment, helmed by a fella named Josh Simmons, who is somewhat notable in the community. Now, a shout out to friend of the show, Metzgirl, for putting this on my radar. So this is a fairly small endeavor that they're going for with this Kickstarter. They've got a $15,000 goal, which they're halfway there as of this recording and still have nearly a month to go in the funding, with a $25 minimum buy-in. For a digital copy, a PDF of the basic rule book. And in RPG systems, $25 isn't too far off the mark for a digital copy for what you would find in similar things. And with an estimated delivery of February, so just about 5 months out. Now, I am a big fan of RPG systems that incorporate six-sided dice. Not least of which reason because everybody always seems to have a bunch of six-sided dice, even if you just have to salvage them from a game of Monopoly or otherwise. But also because I just love dice pool systems and rolling multiple dice and the nice normal distribution curve that tends to give you in a situation. So anyway, with this RPG system, the main focus is to basically approximate the sort of superhero, Saturday morning cartoon superhero style going on. But anyway, Mr. Nice Guy, I've dropped a one truly out of left field on you. What are you thinking?
This is a hard one to judge. Let me just say that.
For sure.
Because it's not something that I'm super well versed in. I have done TTRPGs, own one in the form of HeroScape, and have played others with you and with friends. I think that the challenge with this project is that in order for a new system to be successful, it has to achieve a certain level of appeal. Dungeons and Dragons been around since what, the 80s, the 70s?
Yeah, they've got momentum on their side.
They've got a little bit of momentum on their side and compounding in terms of word of mouth and years of experience and multiple editions and variants of their system. Some might even say that it is the definitive TTRPG system. And I don't know if you'd call it a TTRPG because technically it's you're not necessarily always using pieces, right?
Sure.
But you get what I'm saying. And so for a system to really be successful, it can't just be a Kickstarter that has 83 backers making up half of the pledge. It has to be more broadly known. Otherwise, you invest in this system and you get together with 4 of your friends who have never played it before, and you spend the whole time explaining it and flipping through the rule book. Whereas when I played with you and Ishmobile and Metzgirl, and when we went to that game shop one time and played, there were always several veterans of the genre who knew the system and who could tell us in a moment what should happen when there were questions about the rules. So even if this gets kickstarted, I find that it will be a huge uphill battle.
You know, I hear what you're saying. Yes, there is a lot. The entrenched Dungeons and Dragoners, as somebody who very much shills for a somewhat underground system, not quite an indie system, but you know me, I'm a big GURPS man. Love that system. I would challenge almost anybody who loves role-playing games to give that a shot because I feel like it is perfection. And it's hard to argue, even myself. I want to talk myself into this system. I want to talk other people into this system. But there are many systems that already exist. I do want to hear why you think your stuff will do best. And I do appreciate in their project description that they say something like, it is fast-paced and has fluid combat mechanics that emulate the magic of animated movies and shows like Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. And while I appreciate that, I kind of want to hear how you think or why you think that is the case. How it is that it accomplishes those goals. I want to hear how it is that it does this better than some other option, because I always feel like I already know the second best option for everything.
One thing that he did, or that whoever put this together did a good job of, is actually having a PDF version of the guide. And typically that actually makes me angry, but the reality is they know that people will be able to share that. And so it's going to allow people to buy it for $25, share a copy with their friends so that they can learn the system as well. Whereas if you do have a physical book, which typically you and I are both fans of, you just have the book and you got to photocopy stuff or you scan it in. So they're making it accessible, and I applaud them for that.
Well, Mr. Nice Guy, we still do have some questions about it, but I think I'm ready to say that I will say kickstart. $25 for a RPG system is a low enough entry point that I feel like I can take a risk. And if I really like it, I feel like I can probably get some other people on board, or at least fingers crossed. What do you think, Mr. Nice Guy? Kick or kickstart?
Mac, I got a question for you. When you're on the internet and you're trying to find information, what search engine do you use?
Google.
Okay. And so putting this out is effectively trying to get people to use a system that is different than the one that is generally accepted. Like literally there's Yahoo search engine, there's all types of different search engines.
Is Ask Jeeves still a thing?
I'd assume so. But the interesting thing is that when someone wants to reference how you look something up on the internet, they say Google.
Yeah.
And Google is the definitive search engine. Dungeons and Dragons and GURPS are the definitive RPG.
Oh no,
systems.
Just Dungeons and Dragons is the definitive system. GURPS is
sure. Well, yeah, so fair. Dungeons and Dragons is the definitive. GURPS is well known, or at least somewhat well known. And so I feel like they are just fighting a losing battle to get people to go from using Google and to convince them to go to using Ask Jeeves when the muscle memory is already there to use Google.
I will say this, Dungeons & Dragons, and this is why there are still plenty of other successful RPG systems. Dungeons & Dragons does one thing well, and it does one thing very good, and that's sort of it. You have to get incredibly hacky in order to make D&D work for anything that is not swords and sorcery style Dungeons and Dragons high fantasy stuff. Anything else, it's a whole pain in the butt. You basically have to just have completely different rules and rule books, but using the same dice mechanics. And at that point, it's not even the same game. So I think that's one of the reasons why, I get what you're saying, and I agree. D&D absolutely has all of the momentum in the world, but yeah, this might work if it's doing superheroes right, but I don't know yet.
Yeah, and it's like we were arguing in the chat with Galvatron earlier about if a game can be successful without achieving mass appeal. And so maybe I'm a hypocrite for thinking that this one can't. Because you're, like I said to him in the chat during the show, all you really need to be successful is to find a niche. That applies to everything. You don't need to have 100% market share. Maybe you just need 5 based on your expenses. I wish them the best. I kick this one, though.
And kickstart for me, obviously we wish everybody the best. So, Paragons, the role-playing game, good luck to you. And that's been Kick or Kick Start.
Well, now it's time for Nerdflex.
Woohoo! This happens to be a sound test episode, everybody. So you know what that means. We've got a mystery sound for you to guess. If you can do so successfully, let us know on email, social media such as Twitter, or even in the Discord. Let us know. Include the hashtag soundtest in this episode, episode 319. We've got a prize for you if you can correctly identify the following sound.
I better hurry over to the fireworks factory.
All right, and with that, on with the show, Mr. Nice Guy.
Perfect. We have Nerdflex, and if you're here live, you have a job to do. Let us know in the chat. A multiple choice, gaming-related question. Mac and I will use nothing but our noggins to try to answer it. No phoning a friend, none of that. We will just do our thing. And you know what's funny, Mac? I had the thing pulled up, and I accidentally closed it. But the question was a Pokemon question, and it said, what is the name of the episode that caused over 700 children to have seizures?
Oh, wow.
You were more into Pokemon than me. Any idea?
I think it might be, if anything, it would probably be something like Pikachu's shocking revelation or something like that.
And let's see what it says. On December 16th, 1997, a scene in the Pokemon episode Den-O Senshi Porygon, also known as Electric Soldier Porygon, caused epileptic seizures in hundreds of children in Japan. 38th episode of the first season of Pokemon.
Huh.
And the number of people were 700 rushed to hospitals, mostly children.
Wow.
Now we know it. We have a question in the chat. Mac, would you read that for us?
We do. This is a movie question, but you know what? We'll roll with it. In the movie Predator, who was the second member of the strike team to die? Hawkins, Blaine, Mac, Dylan, Billy, Poncho, Elena, the Predator, or Dutch? I'm going to guess Mac.
You know, it's funny how he comes up with these multiple choice questions. How many options are here? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. That's crazy. I'm going to say it wasn't the Predator, and I'm actually going to go with... Poncho. We have to go the same, don't we? So yeah, let's go with Mac. We'll see if he was being ironic and maybe a little bit passive-aggressive with that answer.
The answer was Blaine. The Predator killed him with his plasma caster. The Predator preferred to kill up close.
Interesting. I don't know what that had to do with video games, but there probably is a Predator video game, and we appreciate the question nonetheless, G. Thank you. Last question we got today. It's a special round, Mac.
Ooh.
And this one's interesting. I can think of one game already. We'll see if you think of it too. Here's the question.
Okay.
Name a game where we never see the protagonist's face. Name a game where we never see the protagonist's face.
Well, obviously Halo's the first one that comes to mind.
Yes, that's a good one. And you know what? I thought of one, and then I just realized this might not be true. I was thinking of Portal.
Oh, I think we do see Shell's face in the reflection.
Yeah, I was going to say in a mirror. In Half-Life, do we see the main character's face?
I don't know if we see Gordon Freeman's face in game.
Right.
He certainly shows up on the dust jacket, on the game advertisements, but I don't think we see his reflection. Maybe we do, but I don't think so.
My thought was, if we can think of games where the character is wearing a helmet, that's a simple answer. And so I immediately thought of some of the Metroid games. We technically never see Samus Aran's face.
Do we ever see Doom Guy's face in Doom?
I don't think we do.
Okay, yeah, he's wearing a helmet. So at the very least, Halo and Doom Guy are pretty solid picks.
Yeah. Okay, well, let's flip. Let's see what else is on here. Wow, okay, so the three that are given are Halo, Doom, and Subnautica.
Oh, Subnautica, yeah.
Cool. Well, it looks like we went 1 for 3, and that has been Nerdflex.
All right. Well, now we turn to a little bit of legalese.
Legalese.
But I'm not a lawyer, neither here nor in Japan. Callback to previously. But here, video games are influenced greatly by the law, and so we talk a little bit about some of that. Now, Mr. Nice Guy, I wanted to chat about, because so many of our video games rely on the internet and the transfer of data, a little something that we haven't talked about in a while called net neutrality, which hasn't been a topic for a bit. So super brief history. 1934, the FCC is born, and what do? I'm quoting their site. They ensure the reasonable price and availability of rapid, efficient communication services. At some point in time, they tacked worldwide on there, but obviously what communication services meant in 1934 was something like radio, Something that they had to be like, hey, we need efficient, effective, reasonable priced availability radio. That's what it meant in the 30s. What about in the 70s? I don't know what kinds of extra communication services we had done up. Maybe satellites by the time we're hitting the 70s. But in the early 2000s, the internet is definitely where things are going. And so, the internet, of course, being a communication service method, is sort of under the FCC's jurisdiction. Now, the FCC says in the early 2000s that internet is how we do most communication now, so internet service providers are not allowed to play favorites with websites or content, that they need to treat all the information, regardless of where it comes, very neutrally. And so they say, now, you guys, to the ISPs, you can't prioritize data that you like or otherwise deliver it all same speeds. And that's not something that Verizon particularly cared for. So they took up some lawsuits and were just like, hey, you can't tell us how to do this. You're not my dad, and so on. And when this went to the courts, the court finally says, hey, you can't tell them not to prioritize stuff unless you, say, reclassify Verizon internet service providers as a common carrier. And then it's within your auspices, FCC, to tell them what to do. And so the FCC says, okay, 10-4, Your Honor. Hey, Verizon, guess what? You're a common carrier. Now quit throttling World of Warcraft. To which Verizon says, no, I'll get you next time, Gadget. Next time. And then everything stays chill for a while, for 17, 15 years or so. And even though I gave you that super quick, quick rundown there, I cannot emphasize enough that everybody at every level across 3 completely different political administrations was 100% on board with the idea that ISPs had no ability to throttle or to prioritize certain data, that they had to treat it all the same on the internet. The only people who didn't care for that was Verizon and their folk. And that was true from the beginning up until there. Now, Mr. Nice Guy, did you want to?
I was just going to say, to be clear, they can throttle data once you hit a data cap. But what you're saying is they can't prioritize based on what type of media you are consuming or types of web pages you are
browsing. 100%. 2 different uses of the term throttling, but yeah, no. I thank you for that clarification. In 2017, Ajit Pai was appointed head of the FCC, and before being in the FCC, he worked for Verizon, who, business daddy didn't care too much for this whole common carrier thing. And so the first thing he does when he gets in there was he says, let's get rid of this thing that we didn't like. And I believe he worked on arguing against the net neutrality concept and being reclassified as a common carrier back when he worked in Verizon. So anyway, he did that, and he says, let's blow it up. And he says, regardless of everything else, what everybody else wants, we need to declassify this so that ISPs can treat data how they want it to, instead of being forced to treat it all identically, regardless of whether or not the ISP likes it. And then, for some reason, in January 20th, 2020, Pai announces that he's resigning and quitting government. Who can say? We don't have time for that. But because leadership of the FTC went from a former Verizon lawyer to back into other people's hands, the decision was made to return it to the way it was done before, reclassifying ISPs as common carriers, which, as a reminder, the FTC was specifically instructed that they could do, and that if they wanted to force net neutrality, they had to do. That was the express finding of the judiciary. So, they tried to do that. And now, just few months back is when they started doing that, and the ISPs come in with their objections again. But now they have a new way to argue things. And as you may recall for Legalese in episode 210, we shared with you that the removal of the notion of Chevron deference meant that Business Daddy would now be able to object to anything that Verizon did not care for via the Airbud rule, which, as a reminder, is the law doesn't expressly say you can stop me from dumping toxic waste, so you now have to prove that you can stop me from dumping toxic waste. I am engaging in just a little bit of hyperbole, but that is the general thing in there. Now, as a result, the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals is currently, as we speak, entertaining the argument that the FCC doesn't have the authority to reclassify ISPs as common carriers. And so until they sort this all out, what Ajit Pai did in 2017 stands. Net neutrality has not been reasserted. And but I have read one of the recent commentaries from the appeals said the following. Quote, "We can't trust that this reclassification that the FTC wants to do now is solid reasoning because the FTC has waffled back and forth on whether or not ISPs are a common carrier since the year 2000. Keeping in mind that this waffling was, we didn't have you classified as a common carrier. The Supreme Court literally told us we had to classify you as a common carrier if we wanted to ensure net neutrality, so we did so, and then one of their lawyers became head of the FCC and declassified you as a common carrier. So that's the flip-flop. The flip-flop is we were specifically told we had to do something, we did it, somebody blew that up, and now that we're trying to go back to the way that we were specifically told to do it by the courts, we're now flip-floppers. All that is to say, I have no idea where this is going. So far, we have been mostly okay with the net neutrality rules not being in place. The sky has not fallen, something that Mr. Nice Guy, I have to give you credit for, because back when we were first talking about this in 2017 and 2018, and I was very upset, and you were like, Mac, chill, it'll be okay, the sky's not falling.
I got lucky with that.
You have very good instincts. However, I think it is objectively true to look at some of the reasoning that Verizon and others use to get their way as usually fairly slimy, and the things that certain people say about it a bit disingenuous. As of yet, we've been harmed relatively little. However, I think it's worth noting that if Verizon didn't have the ability to dictate which data makes it to your phone faster, there would be no incentive for Netflix, Hulu, and others to specifically partner with Verizon for the Plus Play program, for example. There are certain very specific business benefits that while we, the consumers, haven't yet seen the detriments, there are very real things going on behind the scenes that we've not yet had spring on us that I think are evident in the fact of change of business patterns. I'm no business guy. I'm no lawyer. But, that's just what I see. And this has been a rambly legalese that maybe has nothing to do with anything. But yet Mac feels passionately about it. And I thank you for being here for this rant.
Totally get it. Thank you for the insights, Mac. And on that note, that's been our show. Thank you for tuning in, everybody. We appreciate you hanging out. And before we go, we have one last segment called What We've Been Watching and What We've Been Playing, where we talk about just that, the cool, nerdy stuff we've been into on Netflix, on Hulu, because we don't have that internet throttling on our PlayStations, Xboxes, Steam Decks, and everywhere else. And if you're here live, you have a job to do. Let us know in the chat what you have been watching and playing, because we're always looking for more nerdy stuff to get into. Mac, what you been into the past couple weeks?
Man, it has been a whirlwind, and the only thing I've played at all is an old video game on my old laptop called Creeper World. Not Creeper World 4, the original Creeper World. I even had to go so far as to log into an old email address to find my unlock code from 2012. so that I could play it, because it was something that my laptop could handle, something that I enjoyed, and something that I could play with no internet connection. So that's basically all I've been doing. I've been watching some Dimension 20 Never Stop Blowing Up, and that's pretty much it. What about you, man?
Ooh, someone's playing a game that I'm interested in the chat. So I've been doing, once again, as always, doing the retro thing, doing another playthrough of Fallout 4 as I played it years ago when I first got the Steam Deck via remote play on my PlayStation, but never played any of the DLC. So I picked up the DLC recently, the Game of the Year edition in a Steam sale. So I've been replaying that and having a blast with it. Love it on handheld. What a time to be alive. Haven't had as much time for gaming lately, but we are still doing our Marvel watch through. So we're currently up to Thor 2. And what else? Trying to remember, Mac. Life has been so busy. I did do some work travel last week that I didn't mention, so I haven't had as much time. Oh, and I'm still watching Billions. What a great show. I'm on season 4. I love anything having to do with finance and that type of stuff. Mac, that has been our show. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. We find out about the podcast awards when, Mac?
We should find out September 30th. So next Monday, a mere 6 days away.
A mere 6 days away. Cross your fingers for us. Keep being awesome and watching the content. Leave a review if you haven't already on Apple or whatever podcast service you're listening to. Most importantly, remember, games are art, and keep it nerdy, y'all. Deuces.
See ya.